There comes a moment in life when you realize that not every battle deserves your voice. Not every insult deserves an explanation. Not every person who provokes you deserves a reaction. And this is where many people make their greatest mistake. They believe power means responding quickly, defending themselves immediately, or proving that they cannot be disrespected. But real power often looks much quieter. Think about how easily another person can control you when they know exactly how to trigger you. At that moment, they have gained something more valuable than your attention. They have gained control over your emotional state. And the moment you understand this, you begin to see silence differently. Silence is not weakness when it comes from self-control. It is weakness only when you are silent because you are afraid to stand up for yourself. There is a profound difference between the two. One comes from insecurity, the other comes from strength. When someone tries to pull you into an argument, you don't have to enter the arena. When someone wants to make you jealous, angry, or desperate for their attention, you don't have to give them the satisfaction of seeing you react. Pause. Observe. Let the emotion pass before you decide what deserves your response. Because once you stop reacting automatically, something changes inside you. You begin to recognize patterns. You notice who constantly creates drama. You notice who only respects you when you become distant. You notice who needs your emotional energy to feel powerful. And most importantly, you begin to notice how often you have been giving people access to your mind that they never earned. This does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean, and it certainly does not mean using silence as a punishment. Healthy silence is not about making another person suffer. It is about refusing to participate in behavior that destroys your peace. Sometimes the strongest sentence you can say is nothing. Let them wonder why you didn't react. Let them discover that their provocation no longer produces the result it once did. Let them realize that your attention is not something they can summon whenever they want. But remember this, don't become obsessed with making people notice your silence. The moment you start thinking, I hope they realize I'm ignoring them, you are still emotionally attached to their reaction. You step back because you have something more important to protect: your dignity, your peace, your time, and your future. And when you learn to control your reaction, you stop handing your power to everyone who knows how to push your buttons. Your silence becomes powerful when your peace no longer depends on their reaction. And once you learn to control your reactions, you begin to understand another powerful truth. You cannot build your life around chasing people who are uncertain about your value. Most people chase attention without realizing what it is costing them. They keep giving, keep checking, keep proving, and keep trying to convince someone that they deserve to be valued. But the more desperately you chase attention, the more you communicate something without saying a word. I need your response to feel valuable. And that is a dangerous position to live from. There is a psychological difference between wanting someone's attention and needing it. Wanting is natural. Needing it to validate your worth gives another person control over your emotions. Imagine two people standing at the same door. One knocks once and waits. The answer is obvious. Your attention has value because your time has value. Your energy has value. Your presence has value. But people often make the mistake of giving these things away without limits. If you are constantly available, constantly responding, constantly rescuing, and constantly trying to maintain every connection, people can begin to treat your presence as something guaranteed, not necessarily because they are evil, but because human beings often adapt to what is consistently available. This is why stepping back can be so revealing. When you stop chasing, you don't necessarily lose people. Sometimes, you discover who appreciated your presence and who simply became comfortable with your availability. But there is an important distinction here. Do not withdraw your attention as a childish game designed to make someone panic. That is still dependence. You are simply trying to control them instead of allowing them to control you. Real strength is different. You step back because you refuse to force connection. You stop over-explaining because more focused. Instead of asking, why aren't they texting me? You ask, why am I spending so much of my life waiting for someone else's response? Instead of asking, how can I make them choose me? You ask, why am I trying to convince someone to recognize my value? That shift changes everything. Your attention should move toward your purpose, your work, your growth, your relationships, and the person you are becoming. When your life becomes full, you stop treating one person's attention like oxygen. And ironically, this is often when people begin to notice your absence. But don't live for that. Your responsibility is to become someone you refuse to abandon. Stop chasing what requires you to lose yourself just to keep it. And when you stop chasing people and start reclaiming your attention, you begin to see something even more important. Respect is not created by demanding it. It is created by the boundaries you are willing to enforce. There are people who will test you. They will cross a small boundary and watch what you do. Then they will cross another one. They may interrupt your peace, disrespect your time, dismiss your words, or treat your kindness as if it were an unlimited resource. This is why one of the most powerful forms of ignoring is not pretending someone doesn't exist. It is removing their access to you when they repeatedly demonstrate that they do not know how to treat that access with respect. You don't need to announce it dramatically. You don't need a long speech. You don't need to threaten them with what you're going to do. You simply change your behavior. You become less available to unnecessary drama. You stop responding to disrespect with endless explanations. You stop allowing someone to repeatedly cross the same boundary and then expect you to act as if nothing happened. Because your boundaries are not what you say. Your boundaries are what you consistently enforce. Think about it. If you tell someone, don't speak to me that way, but every time they do it, you stay, argue, explain, forgive, and immediately give them the same level of access, your words have very little weight. But if you calmly remove yourself from the situation, your behavior communicates something much stronger. I will not participate in this. That is not cruelty. That is self-respect. You don't have to convince a disrespectful person to become respectful. You don't have to spend months trying to teach someone basic consideration. You don't have to keep presenting evidence that you deserve decent treatment. Sometimes the answer is distance, and distance can be more powerful than confrontation, because confrontation often gives the other person another opportunity to pull you into their emotional world. They provoke you, you defend yourself. They provoke you again, you explain more, the cycle continues, but when you recognize the pattern, you can simply step out of it. People deserve room to apologize, learn, and change. But when disrespect becomes repetitive, intentional, and predictable, continuing to give unlimited access is no longer kindness, it is self-neglect. Your goal is not to punish them. Your goal is to protect yourself. And once you understand that, ignoring disrespect becomes less about power over another person and more about power over your own life. You stop asking, how can I make them respect me? You start asking, what am I willing to accept? That question can change your entire life. Never reward repeated disrespect with unlimited access to you. And once you learn to protect your boundaries, you discover something even deeper. The greatest battle is not always with the person standing in front of you. Sometimes, the greatest battle is inside your own mind. Because anyone can control you if they can control your emotions. Think about how quickly one person's behavior can change your entire day. Someone doesn't reply, and suddenly you're checking your phone every few minutes. Someone criticizes you, and you replay their words all night. Someone tries to provoke you, and before you even realize it, you've already reacted. That is emotional control. And if you don't learn to recognize it, you can spend your life responding to other people's behavior instead of directing your own. The powerful person is not the one who never feels anger, jealousy, disappointment, or insecurity. That person does not exist. Strength comes from feeling those emotions without immediately allowing them to make your decisions. You feel the anger, you acknowledge it, then you pause. That pause is where your power lives. When someone provokes you, give yourself time before responding. Then ask an even more important question. If I react exactly the way they expect me to react, who benefits? Sometimes the answer will be obvious. They want an argument. They want attention. They want you desperate for their approval. They want to see whether they still have the ability to disturb your peace. And when you understand that, You no longer have to participate. You can choose silence. You can choose distance. You can choose to respond later. When your mind is clear, this is not about becoming emotionless. In fact, emotional awareness makes you stronger because you stop being afraid of your own feelings. You can experience disappointment without becoming bitter. You begin observing yourself almost like an outsider. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? What story am I telling myself? What response would serve my future rather than my ego? These questions create space between emotion and action, and that space is where self-control is built. The world will constantly give you reasons to react. Someone will disrespect you. Someone will disrespect you. You can decide that someone's anger will not become your anger. You can decide that someone's rejection will not become your self-hatred. You can decide that someone else's attempt to create chaos will not destroy the peace you spent years building. And this is when ignoring becomes powerful in the healthiest sense. You are not ignoring the person because you are afraid to confront reality. You are refusing to let their behavior dictate your emotional state. That is freedom. The moment you control your reaction, you take back control of your life. And once you learn to control your reactions, protect your boundaries, and stop chasing people for validation, you begin to understand another powerful principle. Sometimes people don't recognize the value of your presence until you stop constantly giving it away. But be careful here, because there is a difference between creating healthy distance and playing manipulative games. A manipulative person disappears because they want someone to panic. They stop responding because they want the other person to chase them. That isn't strength, that is dependence disguised as control. Real strength is stepping away because you have finally realized that your peace is more important than winning someone's attention. When you constantly make yourself available, you can lose perspective. You become so focused on maintaining the connection that you forget to ask whether the connection is actually healthy for you. You answer every call, you respond immediately, you check in constantly, you explain yourself repeatedly, you forgive the same behavior again and again, and slowly, without noticing it, your life begins revolving around. You step back because you need to hear your own thoughts again, and something interesting happens when you create that distance. You begin to see the relationship more clearly. You notice whether the other person reaches out because they genuinely care or because they simply miss the attention you provided. You notice whether there is mutual effort or whether you were carrying the entire connection. You notice whether your absence creates genuine concern or merely inconvenience. Distance reveals patterns that constant proximity can hide. But don't make the mistake of measuring your worth by how quickly someone notices you're gone. That is still giving them control. If they come back, you decide whether their behavior has actually changed. If they never return, you continue moving forward. Your goal is not to become unforgettable. Your goal is to become emotionally independent. There is tremendous freedom in no longer needing to be chased. You don't need someone to suddenly realize what they lost before you can feel valuable. You don't need an apology before you can move forward. You don't need someone to regret leaving before you can rebuild your life. You develop a purpose so compelling that you no longer spend your days monitoring someone else's behavior. And then, if they return, you don't welcome them back simply because you missed them. You observe their actions. Have they changed? Do they respect your boundaries? Do they bring consistency instead of confusion? Are they willing to meet you with the same effort you give? Because words can create hope, but patterns reveal character. You don't need to announce your departure. You don't need to make a dramatic exit. Sometimes you simply become quieter, more focused, and less available to what drains you. Never withdraw to make someone suffer. Withdraw to protect your peace. And now we arrive at the final lesson, the one that makes everything else unnecessary. The real goal was never to become better at ignoring people. The real goal was to become so grounded in yourself that other people's behavior no longer has the power to control your identity. Because if you build your entire strategy around making people chase you, you are still living for their reaction. True strength goes deeper than that. You need to build a life that does not collapse when someone walks away. This is where purpose becomes your greatest protection. When you have nothing meaningful happening in your own life, another person's attention can become an obsession. You begin checking messages, analyzing conversations, wondering why someone changed, and imagining what you could do to make them return. But when your life has direction, your attention becomes more valuable. You have goals to pursue, skills to develop, work to complete, people to appreciate, a future to build. You start asking, what am I building today? That question changes the entire psychology of your life. And understand something important. Becoming difficult to manipulate does not mean becoming cold or suspicious. It means knowing yourself well enough that someone cannot easily make you betray your own values. They cannot make you abandon your goals just because they suddenly want your attention. They cannot make you accept disrespect because you're afraid of losing them. They cannot make you compromise your boundaries because you're desperate to keep the relationship. They cannot make you hate yourself simply because they don't choose you. The difference is that they no longer confuse love with self-abandonment. You can care about someone and still walk away. You can forgive someone and still maintain distance. You can miss someone and still refuse to return to the same destructive pattern. You can love someone without giving them unlimited access to your mind. That is emotional freedom, and the more you develop yourself, the less interested you become in psychological games. You don't need to manipulate people into chasing you. You don't need to disappear just to prove that you matter. Your value becomes something you feel internally. You don't need to disappear just to prove that you matter. Your value becomes something you feel internally. You don't need to. You know what you will tolerate. You know what you are working toward. And you know that losing someone does not mean losing yourself. This is the point where ignoring becomes almost irrelevant. Because you are no longer asking, how do I make them notice me? You're asking, does this person deserve a place in the life I'm building? That is a completely different question. And once you start living from that question, your relationships change, your standards change, your attention changes. You walk away because you know where you're going. You don't stop reacting because you want to punish someone. You stop reacting because your peace is more valuable than the argument. And eventually you reach a place where other people's approval becomes optional, but your self-respect becomes non-negotiable. Build a life so meaningful that you never have to abandon yourself to keep someone else.